Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the Madoka Man at YouTube with a experimental build, my first large scale anime style figure out of a very unusual material. This would be a let's build of my journey in getting this built and painted right, but not to be treated as a tutorial, as this is purely an experiment and me learning how to deal with the medium myself before I pass on knowledge to others. While drifting around eBay, I came across a Thai recaster of resin and soft vinyl kits. The soft vinyl kits were done in PVC, which is more of a durable material and doesn't have any of the drawbacks. And being a dirty bootleg that has not been reproduced or seen for almost 20 years, it's definitely a good experiment, and definitely I don't think the copyright holder will even be aware. The character depicted is Madoka from Orange Road. It is a romance of some sort in a hand-drawn context, fairly well known in the period, and was released in the late 80s, 1987 if I remember correctly, where the medium, which is highly appropriate, would have been soft vinyl at the time. Very little reference material to the pieces. I got this card to what colour I should paint it. Very basic 5 pieces, though they're going to have to be mostly assembled before painting. I might get away with the torso, and marked away all the flash from the moulding part that I need to cut away, clean up before filling and assembly. For an extremely weird medium PVC, normally with soft vinyl you only need a couple of cutting knives. I've got a fine tooth hobby saw, file, and a wood carving device. Later on I used a scalpel and lots of sandpaper. At this stage we got small daggy flash bits. This is easily fixed with the finer hobby knife and sandpaper, as I mentioned previous to this absolute finish, smooth and ready for the next stage refined pieces. Now at a club meet I've got a bowl of plaster and a bowl of water, roughly equal proportions. When mixing plaster or plaster of Paris or anything that's a suitable filling medium, you put the plaster into the water first and mix until you get some sort of oatmeal thick consistency, almost like a putty, but you fill each of the pieces until it's solid. This is so the pieces aren't hollow and you got a lot more weight for it to stand, and as well easier to glue all the pieces together, not relying on just the PVC material alone. This is an extremely similar process that soft vinyl modelers do, so their kit isn't easily damageable or manipulatable. They just fill it up so it's a solid piece, a lot like a resin kit. Now for the tricky part, being a very rough recast, there's a lot of scratches, holes, pinholes, bubble holes, every sort of imaginable fault in the surfaces you can think of, and being representative as smooth flesh and clothing and hair follicles, this is unacceptable. So many layers of Tamiya putty has been applied onto this material and sanded back. I didn't use something like Squadron putty because Rant did something very similar to a Bubblegum Crisis figure, and it refused to dry for more than a week and weakened the PVC. This would not necessarily be the case with soft vinyl, as the chemicals and lacquers in the putty will eat into the material. The only way I can think of gluing and filling in imperfections is super glue and baking soda. The following process was applied. After many sessions of putting and sanding, I eventually primed it and saw many imperfections, so more putty was applied, and I used a few coats of automotive primer. It's the equivalent of Mr. Surfacer 500 grit, probably a little thicker, until I got a very nice smooth consistency I was extremely happy with. If you're doing the same to soft vinyl, acrylic is the only primer you can use on that material. Vallejo would be ideal, I would imagine. Of course, before spraying, the kit was washed in detergent and water to get any mold release off, since I don't know the origins of the kits. And once I was absolutely happy with the finish, after the final automotive primer, I got this very bumpy, scaly orange peel texture. It was easily solved by wet sanding back, and with a primed finished piece, I was ready for painting. Next, mixing a flesh colour, and this is something I've never done before. Following many tutorials and having a large body of light flesh from Plamo Colour, I mixed a heap of white with the light flesh and sprayed it onto the body, hoping to do a lighter, more whiter tone on top of it. Unfortunately, it came out pink as hell, and I had to do my own mixture later with more browns and oranges to get a natural flesh colour. I used the Tamiya acrylic flesh as a reference of mixing, as it's the best flesh colour I own and know of. Later, I made a very silly mistake. It was dropped and slightly damaged, so I tried to mask some of that with a little airbrushing and toned down the flesh colour to more of a white. It seems very pale, but as my first time, this is as realistic as I can get without more practice and looking into. Right now, I'm happy. With a little pre and post shading skills under my belt, I tried the same technique on flesh by highlighting some areas and then shading back. This worked extremely well and a lot easier than it actually looks. Later on, I masked off all the flesh areas, hand painted the top and hair, and again with a much lighter colour, highlighted and post shaded some of these areas with a little bit of detailing and effects in the hair to get some sort of pastel colour effect. I was extremely pleased with this part. Next, after everything is painted, making a base. This thing is not going to stand on its own, obviously, so I'll put in a brass rod into the feet, and instead of applying it to a standard wooden base, I found this tiny canvas in a junk art shop and painted it up with a little bit of masking to look like some sort of hotel hot spring carpet. The red and gold is very oriental. It came out a lot better than I hoped, and more of these mini canvas bases will be used as in figures in future due to its carpet nature. And finally, my finished product. I've made a lot of mistakes. I have learnt a lot from it. It was an incomplete, imperfect kit at first. That was only meant to be a experiment. It came out good enough for me to, with confidence, put out at a show, with obvious faults. The face and hand painting bits and pieces were really easy if you know how to take care of a fine brush, painting inside the mouth and the eyes. The eyes do need a bit of practice, but Anime Eyes has a lot of white little glinty areas and can mask some mistakes. Not too hard at all to do. The flesh has been touched up numerous times in many failed experiments until I got something that I'm happy. And yeah, I'm definitely going to do more figures. Major mistakes I've made. I'm still very new to flesh. Toning flesh, mixing flesh. It's okay, but not perfect. I'd like to be of a much higher level. It's something I'll do further research and testing. I did not pin this kit, though I don't know if it's the structure of the plaster is not very strong, but cracks in the finish and glue did appear after it did fell from the paint. Unfortunately, it's something I will live with. And general cleanliness, any mistakes will show and you can't hide it, so you just generally have to repeat. I will learn by these. Still, with pride, this can sit in my display cabinet or display shelf. It can attend shows, and all in all, it's something I will definitely keep. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you picked up some bits and pieces from this, and look forward to some more kits and potential tutorials in the future. See you later.